Our scripture reading today is Luke chapter 15, verses 1 and 2 and 10 to 32. And if you've been in the church for any length of time at all, this is a familiar passage to you. Even if you've never been in the church before, there's a good chance you've heard this story that I'm about to read here today. Now, the tax collectors and sinners were all gathering around to hear Jesus, but the Pharisees and the teachers of the law muttered, "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them." Jesus continued, "There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, 'Father, give me my share of the estate.' So he divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all that he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, 'How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare, and here I am starving to death? I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.' So he got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. The son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate, for this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' So they began to celebrate. Meanwhile, the older son was in the field. When he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. He called one of the servants and asked him what was going on. 'Your brother has come,' he replied, 'and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound.' The older brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, 'Look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders, yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours, who has squandered your property with prostitutes, comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him.' 'My son,' the father said, 'you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad, because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.'" We are continuing today in the Tablet to Table series. Been saying from the beginning, the power of the table is to shape identity and form community. When we gather with folks to eat, when we share meals together, we form each other, we shape each other, we build community, and we shape that community. And the part of the question that is what kind of community are we shaping? What kind of community are we forming? What kind of identity are we shaping? And Jesus gives us a window into that today. And this might seem like an odd story to tell as part of a series on tablet to table and table fellowship, but the table really shows up 2 places here. One in the feast that the father throws for his younger son, and the other at the very beginning. But to get the final point we're going to get here today, and I'm going to just mention it up front, and then we're going to circle back around to it at the end, is just this short, simple message: don't miss the party. Don't miss the party. God's throwing a party. Don't miss the party. It's easy to miss the party. And so we're going to take a look at that today, but we've got to look at the context here to really understand this story. I had a preaching professor in seminary. His name was Fred Craddock. He was, at the time I was there, he was actually a nationally known preacher. Time magazine had put out, the 10 greatest preachers in the United States, and he was on that list. I hadn't heard of him before I went there, but he was amazing. He was an amazing preacher, one of the best I've ever heard. And he wrote a book called Overhearing the Gospel. And he talked about how for church folks like you, like me, or anyone who's spent a lot of time in the church, it's easy to hear the message so much that we stop hearing the message. You know what I mean? And this is one of those stories that there's a good chance you've heard before. And it's easy to kind of gloss through and say, oh, I know this one. I'm just going to check out. But we miss the details. We miss some of the most significant things. So we're going to really take this story apart piece by piece and really, really hear, hopefully freshly, the message that Jesus has for us in this story. And to get that, we need to see the context in which Jesus told this story. The context began in verses 1 and 2. Now the tax collectors and sinners were all gathering around to hear Jesus. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law muttered, "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them." Now, a couple of things here. I've said it before. I'll say it again because we need to hear it over and over and over again. Table fellowship mattered in Jesus' day in a way far more than it does for us today. When you went to someone's house for dinner or had someone to your house for dinner, you were saying, I endorse this person. I welcome this person. I am welcoming them into my family. I'm willing to be considered part of their family. I'm willing for people to know they're my friend and that I'm their friend. And Jesus was doing this with the most disreputable people in the community, the tax collectors and sinners. And the church folks were saying, what's going on? How can this man be a man of God? How can he truly be a prophet of God and associate himself with these folks? But here's what was happening. These tax collectors, again, tax collectors were political, national, religious traitors. They were working for the Roman government to exploit their fellow Israelites for their own personal profit and gain and to further the power of the occupying Roman government. And the sinners were just bad people that were doing bad things. And the Pharisees would have acknowledged that all people sin, but like a lot of church folks, they had special categories for sin, where if you do those sins, you're really bad, and we really can't hang out with you, and we really can't have anything to do with you. And anyone who really loves God will really never be with those folks, much less have him in their house. And that's who Jesus was eating with. And so in response to this muttering, this murmuring criticism of this man, eats with sinners and welcomes them into his house. Well, not into his house. Jesus didn't own a house, but he welcomes sinners and eats with them. Jesus told 3 stories. The first story was the story about a shepherd who had 100 sheep, and one of those sheep got lost. And the shepherd was so concerned about the one lost sheep that he left 99 sheep unprotected, undefended. Shepherds had a job. They weren't just hanging out watching sheep. They were there for a reason. Left 99 sheep unprotected to go search for the one sheep that was lost and celebrated when he found that sheep. And then he told the story of a woman who had 10 coins, very valuable coins, each of those coins worth a month's wages. She had 10 of them and she lost one. And she didn't sit back and say, well, I've still got 9. She scoured the house, cleaning everything, lifting every rug, every piece of furniture, every little pot and dish until she found the one coin that was lost. And then she celebrated because she'd found the coin that was lost. And then Jesus told the story of a father who had 2 sons. 100 sheep, one was lost. 10 coins, one was lost. 2 sons, one was lost. And that story, which we so often call the story of the prodigal son, is really not a story of, first of all, prodigal is way too quaint a word for that son, and I'm going to get to that in a minute, but the story is really not about that lost son. The story's about the father and how he responded to his lost son. Like the story was about the shepherd, how he responded to the lost sheep, and the woman, and how she responded to the lost coin. That's the context for this story. All of those 3 stories are a response to Jesus being criticized for welcoming sinners and eating with them. So let's jump into the story. Let's look at the despicable younger son. I like despicable much better than prodigal. Prodigal sounds way too like Flannel graph Bible studies. When you're a kid, you get flannel graph, right? You remember flannel graph? I remember flannel graph. You get flannel graph David and Goliath, which is a cute story about David standing up to a giant. The real story, which you never saw on the flannel, I never saw the real story, because in the real story, David takes Goliath's sword, cuts his head off, and spends the rest of the day carrying around Goliath's severed head. Never saw that on a flannel graph, ever. Ever. The real version, the son is not prodigal, he's despicable. He is absolutely despicable. Let's take a look at it. And again, to really wrap our brains around this, we need to take a cultural leap back to first century Middle Eastern culture to see what was going on here and just how rotten this kid was. The younger son said to his father, "Father, give me my share of the estate." For us, that sounds like he's greedy and he just wants money. For Jesus' hearers, this is what they heard when the younger son said this to his father. What they heard was the younger son saying, "Father, you are worth more to me dead than alive. I wish you were dead now so I could have the money now, because that's what matters to me." That's what he said to his father. And all of Jesus' hearers knew that's what he was saying to his father. So the father divided the property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got all that he had together and left for a distant country and there squandered his wealth. Now we see how much more despicable the son is. So if you're watching the news at all today, you understand that even in the 21st century, Jewish folks have a very high value for their homeland. Very high value. This was a Jewish son who had received he demanded an inheritance early from his father, "Wish you were dead," takes that, and this was not the father cashing in an IRA. He was not cashing in a trust that he had set aside. Their wealth was in property and in animals. So this was a father who had to sell property and sell animals, part of the land that was meant to be taken care of for that family for generations. That land was generational wealth. It was not just meant for one kid to go and waste. As an inheritor, as an heir of that estate, he had a responsibility to stay there and use that property for the betterment of his family, for the generations to follow him, and for the community around him. But instead, he took that wealth not only out of the neighborhood, but out of the country. He took that sacred gift from God. This was promised land. This was land given by God to the Israelites. And this son sold the land, had his father sell the land, convert it to money, took that wealth out of the country where it enriched other people and other nations, and did nothing for his nation, nothing for his family, nothing for the generations that would follow. All of which were sacred trusts that everyone knew this son had a responsibility in those areas. This son was despicable. He was utterly selfish, utterly contemptuous of his father, utterly contemptuous of his responsibility to his families, to his nation, to his community. He just took it and left, and it all went away. It all went away. Everyone hearing this story would not have thought, well, this prodigal son, it's bad, but you got to forgive. They would have thought, this kid is rotten, as bad as it gets, as bad as it gets. The despicable younger son. Let's take a reality check, because this is real life. This is real life. People make bad decisions that have consequences that are destructive and painful. Every one of us knows someone who has made decisions like this son. Maybe not to the same extreme, maybe some to further extremes, that have made bad decisions that have destructive consequences that are painful for the people around them. This is life. We all do it to some extent. We're all sinners. We know that. We all sin. We all fall short of the glory of God. But we also know this reality that some sins have greater social consequences than others. And this son had some bad ones. Why am I spending so much time on this? Because to really understand just how much grace and mercy and forgiveness the Father showed this son, we have to understand just how badly this son behaved. Been reading a book that will probably become a teaching series in a year or so. This is a heavy book, and it's taken me a while to get through it. It's called The Book of Forgiveness, and it's written by Desmond Tutu and his daughter Emmaus. That name might not be at the front of your brains. He was in the news years back in big ways, back when the apartheid regime in South Africa came to an end. Well, during apartheid in the 20th century, Desmond Tutu was the Archbishop of the Anglican Church in South Africa. An African-American. He was African. He wasn't American. He was South African, black man, and experienced horrible discrimination at the hands of the white colonists that ran the apartheid government in South Africa. When Nelson Mandela became president, he and Tutu knew each other, and Mandela charged Desmond Tutu with leading what was named the Forgiveness and Reconciliation Committee, or leading the Forgiveness and Reconciliation process. He was the head of the committee that led that. And Tutu's job was to help South Africans forgive the people that had hurt them and brutalized them and reconcile with each other. Generations of hateful, awful, violent, demeaning, destructive behavior. And their task was to help people learn to forgive and to reconcile. Tutu knows a thing or two about forgiveness. His daughter Emmaus does as well. One of the things he points out in that book is that there can be no forgiveness without acknowledging the real pain that was caused by the sin to begin with. There is no forgiveness when we just say, it's not that bad. It's no big deal. It's nothing really. I'll just forgive and forget and move on. That's not forgiveness. That's delusional thinking. If it really was nothing, there's nothing to forgive. To forgive, we have to say, this was bad. This hurt. This caused pain. It caused trauma. It caused harm. And we got to acknowledge that before there can be any forgiveness. And so Jesus wanted everybody to know when he was telling this story that this younger son had done really bad things that had caused real pain and real harm and brought real shame upon his whole family. That's what makes the forgiveness so significant, is how real and how deep it was. Let's move on. Let's take a look at the Father, the ridiculously gracious Father. He was ridiculously gracious. Let's take a look at it. While that was the son, was returning, while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him, and he ran to his son. He threw his arms around him and he kissed him. So far, the father has been ridiculously gracious. He could have, when his younger son said, give me the cash, I want out now, I wish you were dead, his father could have just kicked him out of the family, could have publicly shamed him and disgraced him, could have, under Old Testament law, could even potentially had him stoned to death. Dishonoring your parents could be punishable by death. Glad my parents didn't, But instead, he was so gracious, he just did it. He liquidated half of his estate, gave it to his younger son, who squandered it. Then, when his younger son's coming back, he sees his son. His son's a long way off. He has no idea what his son's thinking. He has no idea why he's come back. He has no idea what's motivating him. He has no idea on any of these things. He just sees his son and he runs to him. Now, for us, that sounds really cool. That's like a movie ending. I'm going to run. We'll embrace. In Jesus' day, running was for children and for servants. an adult male would never run anywhere, particularly someone of a high social status. Running was a shameful thing to do. And this guy, he had enough, you can see from the story, this is a rich dude. He's got high social status. For him to run, it'd be like going to a funeral in a Speedo. That level of shaming and embarrassing. This father is so intent on getting to his son, he's willing to shame himself even further in the eyes of the community to welcome his son and receive him. And what's he do? He doesn't scold him. He doesn't lecture him. He doesn't criticize him. He doesn't condemn him. He doesn't judge him. He throws her arms around him and he kisses him. He welcomes him home. And then he goes further. The father said to his servants, quick, bring out the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. What did this signify? This signified not I'm receiving my son back as a hired hand. I'm receiving my son back into the family. This is my son. Everyone needs to know he's still part of my family. He's wearing my robe. He's wearing my sandals. He's wearing my ring. He's my son. He's part of the family. He's not some second-class citizen. He's not going to be treated like, the scoundrel. We'll put him out living on the back 40 and hope no one notices. He's part of the family again. He was dead. Now he's alive. He was lost. Now he's found. A ridiculous level of grace. And to top it all off, we know what the father did. The son didn't come back because he'd had a great change of heart. He didn't come back because he suddenly realized he'd been despicable and he needed to repent. He came back because he was hungry. He wasted all the stuff. It was gone. And it wasn't until he was taking care of the pigs, the dirtiest, most disgusting job that you could have as a Jewish man, taking care of unclean pigs, and was so hungry he wanted to eat the pig food. Then he said, "Oh, my father's servants have plenty to eat. They got a nice place to live. I'll go back. I'll tell Dad I'm sorry. I'll make it sound good. I know he's not going to welcome me back in the family, but at least I'll have a warm place to stay and plenty to eat." He didn't come back because he's like, "Oh my goodness, I hurt my dad so much." Excuse me. I hurt my family so much. He came back. He came back because he was hungry. He wanted something. And his father was just glad to see him. Just glad to see him. Welcomed him home. His father was ridiculously gracious to this younger son. Let's see how he treated his dutiful older son, his dutiful and self-righteously arrogant older son. I am realizing that I took my cold medicine and forgot to take my cough medicine this morning. I apologize. Dutiful and self-righteously arrogant older son. The older son was out in the fields when all this happened. This younger son came back, and there was a party going on. Heard the dancing, heard the singing, heard the music, asked the servant. The servant told him what was happening. The older son was livid, absolutely livid, angry, refused to go into the party. And by the way, here's another act of grace on the part of the father. He went out to his older son. Again, he's the father. He should have demanded, culturally speaking, he could have and should have demanded that his older son come to him, but he went out to him, just like he went out to the younger brother. He went out to him. But this son's, and we can understand that, right? I mean, we can understand that. When I got a friend, I love her to death. She told me years ago, said, "Pastor Scott, I hate this story. I hate this story. It's not fair." She was the older sister. She had younger siblings that behaved like this. It's like, it's not fair. This guy, he worked his whole life. He did everything right. And the younger son gets the party. The one who behaved despicably, wasted all the money, wasted all the wealth. All he did was come home. All he did was come home. and he gets a party. This is not fair. It's not fair. It's like, I don't know. If we've grown up in the church, and you know, we kind of know if you behaved yourself. I don't know. If you behaved yourself your whole life, if you tried to do the right thing your whole life, even if you know you're not perfect, even if you know you've screwed up, when you look at the folks that go way off the deep end and they get all of the attention, when they come back, there's something irritating about that. If we're honest, I think. There's something irritating about that. The older brother was angry. Here's the reality check here. It's hard to forgive. We got to acknowledge it. It's hard to forgive. Even when people repent, even when people are remorseful, even when people are truly sorrowful, even when they come up and say, you know what? I was so wrong. I was so wrong. I'm so sorry I hurt you the way I hurt you. It's still hard to forgive. But when people just come back to get something, it's really hard to forgive. It's really hard to get past it. It's really hard to not want them to suffer, maybe just a little bit, maybe a lot, for the stupid, boneheaded stuff that they did. And that's the older son. He'd always done his best to do right by his dad, and he never even got a barbecue in the backyard, much less a full-blown feast to celebrate. I don't know about you. I can relate to the older son. I can relate to him. I'm not proud of that, but I can relate to him. Let's go one more thing here. So the father went out and pleaded with him. My son, the father said, you were always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. It's the second time the father has said this. Remember, there's no highlighting, there's no bold facing when you're writing a scroll, when you're telling a story in Jesus' day. When you want to emphasize something, you repeat it. This is the thing Jesus is saying. We have to celebrate when the one who was dead is alive again, when the one who was lost, it was found. And Jesus makes it clear. He's talking to the Pharisees, remember? He's talking to those good church folks who are upset that he's eating and celebrating and partying with the tax collectors and sinners. And he says, this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He's lost and is found. We have to celebrate. Reality check. God's grace extends ridiculously far. Extends. All this kid did was come home. And he did. He got his speech. He got part of his speech out. I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. How sincere he was about it, we don't know for sure. But even if he was sincere, that's all he did was come home. The father runs out to meet him, wraps him up, welcomes him back into the family, and throws a party for him. God's grace extends ridiculously far. The question this leaves us all with is, will you come to the party? Because let's go back and look at that last one. This is where the story ends. This brother of yours was dead and alive again. He was lost and is found. The older brother is still standing outside. The Pharisees are still standing outside. There's a party going on. And the question Jesus leaves them with, these dutiful older brothers and older sisters, the question he leaves them with is, will you come to the party? Jesus, I have to celebrate. When these brothers of mine that were dead are alive again, ones that are lost or found, I know they're coming, some of them coming just for the miracles. I know some of them are coming just for the free food. I know some of them are coming just to be healed. I know some of them don't really understand how bad they've hurt the people around them. I get that, but they're coming to me. Jesus said. And I have to celebrate that. I got to wrap my arms around them. I got to love them. I got to let them know they're not second-class citizens with me. They're not going to be stuck on the back 40. They're not going to be put up where no one can see them. I'm going to let everyone know because I want them to know beyond a shadow of a doubt that they are my family. And I love them. And I love them. Now, all of this at this point is very abstract, very theological, very theoretical. Let's make it concrete to wrap things up. So, I believe, raise your hand if you disagree with me. Raise your hand if you disagree with me. We all want this building to be full on Sunday mornings, right? I don't think anybody disagrees with that. We would love to have it so full that we would have to say, you know what, maybe we need to do this twice every Sunday. And maybe that's still so full, we got to do it again on Wednesday too. We would love that. Here's a reality, another reality check. In the United States, church growth, I believe this was a Barna survey, someone did the survey. I don't know who the professionals that know what they're doing did the survey. In the United States, 80% of church growth is transfer growth. That means if you know of a church that's really growing like gangbusters, 80% of the folks there are just people that were angry at their pastor and decided they wanted to go to a different church, or irritated by someone else in the church and decided they wanted to go to a different church, or the church wasn't meeting their needs, so they decided they wanted to go to another church. 80% of the people in that church are probably just folks leaving from one church to go to another. That's why that's not a bad thing. There's no net loss for the kingdom when someone leaves one church to go to another church. That's why I don't get too fussed. If people get irritated with me and they go to another church, I don't get too fussed. There's no net loss for the kingdom. It's also why I don't get super excited when people leave another church to come to a church where I'm pastoring. Because there's no net gain to the kingdom. If they got irritated with that pastor, they'll probably eventually get irritated with me too. That's how things go when people move from church to church. But where are the people that aren't going to church anywhere? I'm going to be honest with you. Those are the folks that I want to see filling up these pews. Not the people that are upset with their pastor at another church coming to this one instead. They want to come, that's cool, that's fine. But who I really want to see coming here are the folks that aren't going to church anywhere, that feel like they're not welcome anywhere, that they don't belong anywhere, that they're not loved anywhere. But if we want to see those folks coming to church here, we have to diligently guard against older brother syndrome. And it's so easy for us. I've grown up in the church. I know I'm a sinner. I know I've done bad things. But it's hard for me sometimes to guard against older brother syndrome. It's just a reality. I think it just comes with the territory of being in a church for a while, of being committed to this way of following Jesus for a while, that we forget, particularly if I grew up in it. And so to forget or to not realize how hard it is for someone to really make a dramatic change and come for the first time as an adult or even as a teenager, how hard that is. We got to guard against that older brother syndrome. Hey, I'm going to say something. This is scary. I like big wooden pulpits like this because when I say things like this, it gives me something to duck and cover behind. But I'm not throwing stones. I'm talking to myself too. Okay? I'm not throwing stones. I'm talking to myself too. The number one reason people don't go to church is the people who do go to church. You're just going to hang out down here for a few minutes. And I'm really not throwing stones. I'm not trying to be snarky. I'm not trying to be nasty. Because I think, and some church folks are just mean. I'm sure you've encountered some mean folks in church somewhere along the way too. But I don't think this dutiful older son was just mean. He had, culturally speaking, and I had this good authority, someone who knows what they're talking about. In that day and age, he had a cultural responsibility to punish his younger son for what he had done, even to the point perhaps of stoning him to death. a culturally appropriate response for the older son when his younger brother came back would have been to gather his friends and beat the crap out of his younger brother and maybe even kill him to restore honor to his family by punishing the one who had done such a despicable thing. He didn't do that. He was just angry because he didn't get a party, too. He felt like this wasn't fair. So I don't know that the older son was mean. I don't know that some of the Pharisees were mean. I don't know that all of them were mean. But we got to guard against. See, folks that don't know that they're going to be welcomed and received are afraid they will be judged and condemned and rejected. And that's why I think Jesus sets this example that when someone turns at all toward Jesus, that we welcome them enthusiastically and graciously and hugely, doing more for them than we would ever do for another one of us who's been with us all these years, because they know they belong here. But this person, they don't know. And what they're afraid is that they're going to get judged. They're going to get condemned. They're going to get criticized, that they're not really going to be welcome. They're going to show up and people will be kind of nice. They'll be friendly, but you can be friendly without really welcoming people. Oh, hi, how are you? Now I'm going to turn and talk to these folks I've known for 30 years and I really know them and I love them and I get along with them and I don't really know you and I don't particularly like you. People pick up on that. And it's easy to do it even by accident. So if we want to see these pews full, not of folks who are irritated with their current pastor or irritated with their current church and so want to check us out instead, we want to see it filled with folks who don't go to church anywhere and have never been to church anywhere. We've got to be ready to be ridiculously gracious to those folks at the first opportunity, so they know they're welcome. So they know they belong. So they know that they're our family. We love them just like we love each other. We welcome them and want them here just like we welcome and want each other here. That's the example Jesus gave us. There's a party. Jesus is throwing a party. There's celebration in heaven. Angels celebrating every time someone turns to Jesus. There's a party. Question is, will we come to the party? And Jesus told these stories. I'm 100% convinced Jesus told these stories to say to church folks down through the ages, you've been good. You've been faithful. One of these days you're going to inherit my kingdom. But don't miss the party. Don't miss the party. These brothers and sisters of yours, they were dead. Now they're alive. They were lost. Now they're found. Celebrate and let them know they belong. In Jesus' name, amen.